Welcome to the audio laboratory. Today we're going to take a first look at compression. Although compressors can seem complicated and intimidating at first, the basic principle is actually very simple. Lower the volume if the input goes above this threshold. And when the input drops below the threshold again, you turn the volume back up to normal. Simple enough, right? But this is actually one of the most important tools at our disposal. Let's look at what compression does to a track. This is the waveform of an uncompressed track, and this is the same track after compression. See how the highest peaks were reduced by the compressor? Now here comes a trick. Because the loud parts are attenuated, there's some headroom up here again. So now we can make everything louder. The loudest parts are now back to where they were before, but the softer parts have all gone up in volume. Pretty clever. We can turn down loud parts, but we can also turn up quiet parts. So let's take a look at all this in the digital audio workstation. If you feel like you constantly have to adjust the volume of a track for it to sit well in the mix, then this might be a job for a compressor. For example, some parts of this track are not loud enough. They get a bit lost in the mix. We could raise the track volume until the softer parts come through, but then the louder parts would overpower the mix. So, instead of a simple volume adjustment for the entire track, we need to create a better balance between its softest and loudest parts. We need to reduce the dynamic range of the signal. Let's solo the track so we can hear it without the rest of the mix. On this compressor, the threshold is indicated by a dashed line. Only if the signal goes above that line, the compressor will do anything at all. We want the compressor to become active during the louder parts, roughly above here. So, let's move the threshold accordingly. See how the peaks are already being attenuated now? The compressor brings them closer in volume to the softer parts. The red line shows where the compressor is turning the signal down. The ratio knob controls how much you want the compressor to turn down the signal once it crosses the threshold. At 1:1, this does absolutely nothing. What goes in, comes out. And at 100:1, it will squash the living hell out of the signal, although it can never push the signal below the threshold. With the attack and release controls, we can now fine-tune how quickly the compressor should react or let go when the threshold is crossed. Let's listen to the track in context. Of course, now the track's volume is too low. After all, we just turned down the louder parts. But what we took away from these louder parts, we can now give back to the whole track with a bit of makeup gain. The end result is that the loudest parts are now roughly back to their original level, but the softest parts are now louder and more present in the mix. Compressors come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. This one looks very different. Here the compress knob sets the threshold, so as I turn it up, the compressor starts reacting. It doesn't have a graph display, but this needle shows you how much the gain is being reduced. There's no ratio control, and you won't find an attack or release control here either. The reaction times of the compressor are dialed in with these timing presets. It's a simpler, less surgical concept compared to the compressor you saw before, but it also gets the job done beautifully. Listen how the compressor can bring up the ambience when we really crush the drums. You might have wondered why the signal didn't get quieter as I increased the compression. That's because automatic gain compensation, or auto gain, is on. Here's without. When I increase the threshold with auto gain on, the compressor automatically compensates for the volume loss with more makeup gain. If it's well implemented, auto gain can help you avoid one of the biggest pitfalls for beginners. Because sometimes it can be hard to tell if it was the actual compression that made the sound better, or your brain simply likes the makeup gain you added, because it thinks louder is always better. Spoiler alert, it isn't. There's a huge number of different compressors out there. They range from clean and transparent to character compressors that add color, grit, or dirt to your signal, and everything in between. That's it for this flashcard, but there are more to come on this topic. Don't hesitate to leave a comment. And if you want to see more videos like this one, subscribe and ring the bell.
Bunny.